This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We begin with K-State southeastern area agronomist Bruno Pedreira providing insight on options for producers with damaged or dead fescue. Bruno shares that now would be a great time to clean up those fields, run soil tests, and plant alternative forages. Also ahead, the recently released WASDE report for January was full of global import and export insights. Guy Allen, senior economist with the International Grains Program, explains how China's decline in population will affect agricultural trade and the significance of ongoing production success in Brazil and Australia. We end with Reno County horticulture extension agent Pam Paulsen providing some tips to help gardeners find reliable information online. As a part of the 2023 K-State Garden Hour, she put together a webinar on gardening myths and misconceptions. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by K-State southeastern area agronomist Bruno Pedreira for a conversation on damaged or potentially dead, in some cases, fescue that we have seen recently. So first and foremost, Bruno, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Samantha. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So we just wanted to talk through what some of the options are for producers going into 2023 if they do have cases of damaged or, sadly, dead fescue fields. So I guess kind of what we can begin with is what set us up to see such damage specifically with fescue?
Well, that's a really nice conversation to have. Last fall was horrible for us, right? Especially here in southeast Kansas. We had the hottest September and the hottest October since 1895. So for 128 years, we never had something hot like this and dry like this. So most of the fescue was kind of dormant during the summer month. And after June, July, we didn't get the rain that we were expecting. So we were like D3 or D4 drought from late June through the fall. And most of these fescue fields, they were not able to recover as we used to see in a regular fall weather. And that was what made us kind of concerned what we have right now. And during the winter, there is not much what we can do. But what I would like to discuss with you today is knowing that we had a bad fall last year and knowing that some of the fescue fields didn't regrow as we were expecting, what we can do in the next time, in the spring, what we can do for the spring.
Absolutely. And I guess that's a good place to start for sure, is highlighting that there's not really a lot we can do right now in the winter months. Not a lot going on in terms of fescue growth or planting even options. So when it comes to considerations for spring, like you said, there's plenty of options to go around. So producers don't need to be too stressed. So let's start with some of those.
Let's do it. First of all, what I want our farmers to do right now is to try to evaluate what did they get late fall. Some of the fields were recovering late in the fall, but we also get a early freezing, lower temperatures. So the fescue maybe tried to come back and we didn't get it. So try to evaluate what you have right now. Some of our fields around here, they came back, and really in the very beginning of the spring, you will be able to see it better. So from now on, keep the eyes on your fescue and try to figure out if it's coming or not. Okay? If it's not coming, or if you already have a fescue field that you were not happy with it, and you knew that you were, getting in a point that you should thinking about establish something new or moving forward with a different crop, maybe that's the time to consider it. Go forward, take soil samples, figure out what you have in your soil in terms of PMK and pH. So based on that, we will be able to get a good recommendation and plan a good establishment. But if you know that you are in trouble and you are not seeing any fescue there and you really think that you are, in a bad situation, we should consider plant some warm season grasses or summer annuals during the spring, summer time, depending on what you have and what you need. And also, that's a good time as well to thinking about novel tall fescue. We know that we have been using Kentucky 31 for a while. It's a nice plant. We have been using it for for a few years. But novel tall fescue has been great in Kansas as well. And that's maybe one thing that we need to consider.
Absolutely. And then comparatively, when we're thinking about these alternatives to, the fescue that we're either not happy with or that's just not coming back the way we expected it to, nutritionally, when we look at them comparatively, kind of similar or some huge differences there producers should be wary of?
Well, I would say like this. If you were able to plant, for example, forage soybean, would be great. Would be a different plant, high nutrient value. We could have it baleage, or either if you don't need forage, you can have it as a grain and sell it as a grain, right? So it would be a nice alternative to give us high forage quality if you need, or grain if you want to sell it instead of grazing or make baleage out of it. But other than that, we will have plants like crabgrass or Bermuda that you can think as a warm season grass, or something like sorghum Sudan or pearl millet. Those will be other alternatives we have with really nice and high quality forage as well. It needs to be well managed. We need to take care about prussic acid and nitrates when we start the grazing period. But those will be options that we have. I really like to think about forage soybean. Some of them will be Roundup ready, and it will help us a lot in terms of clean the field. Because even with a damaged fescue, assuming that is not completely dead, we will see some fescue come back. And if we are thinking about a novel fescue, if you are thinking that we need to, get rid of the Kentucky 31 we have right now, and we are going to spend some money and try to establish a new cultivar, a new variety, it would be really nice to have something like row crops to get rid of all of the plants we have there, clean field, and then in the fall, we will be able to plant our novel tall fescue, and we will have a really nice field. That's one of the things that I want to stress a little bit today, because when you plant grass over grass, weeds will be always a challenge. So if you have a chance to go row crops for a while during the summer period, clean the field, make sure that in the fall, you will have a really nice fescue field. And talking about next fall, I think one of the questions I have getting in the last few weeks also is, can I plant tall fescue during the spring now? Because it would be an opportunity if you already have a half field, think like this, your field is not dead, but it's halfway. Yes, you can try to, enrich that field and kind of non-till the field with some fescue that you already have. But springtime is not the best time to do it. So if you are planning to keep that field and you just want to enrich it, you may want to do it. But the best thing you'll do will get rid of it, clean everything, and start the next fall with low weed pressure and a really nice fescue field that you are going to use for a few years, right? We are not thinking, I know that establishment is high, the cost is high, takes some time, a few operations. It's not an easy thing to do. But as soon as you get a brand new field and you can have it without any kind of weeds, you will be able to use these fields for a bunch of years, getting good quality and forage out of this place.
Absolutely. Yeah, an investment for sure at the beginning, but like you said, one that pays off as the years go on and definitely worth the time. Bruno, you hinted at it just then a minute ago, how you said, having a field of soybeans maybe before in between you plant something new, a new grass or a new, novel fescue, if that's what you're wanting. That's a good opportunity, but cleaning it up, getting those samples, finding out what that soil really needs, a great opportunity to do that, right?
Oh, yeah. There is no way to move forward in this conversation without knowing what we have in the soil, right? It's like when we go to the doctor. The first thing they need is a blood test for us. That's what we need. We need to know what we have there. And just to give you an idea, I'm working in one of the fields that came through my desk this week. And in this field in particular, I don't need any kind of phosphorus and any kind of potash. So you may save some money if you take a soil sample and figure out that you need or you do not need, and if you need, how much you need to move forward and plant a brand new fescue field for you.
Like you said, takes the guesswork out of it and saves you some money, hopefully, there in the long run. And I know K-State, we offer some soil testing that's available for producers. So if they want to mail in that sample and get it sent off here to the university, we'd be more than happy to get that taken care of.
Sure. In all of our extension offices, you'll find an extension agent with a soil core and all the protocol you need to have a really nice soil sample and help you to make these decisions.
Wonderful information for sure, Bruno. Can't thank you enough for joining us to share it today. And we are talking about this today because you recently wrote about this exact topic in an Agronomy e-update, which I will link in the show notes of today's show, which can be found on agtoday.net as always. But Bruno, you really wanted to emphasize that listeners could reach out to you or any other ag extension agents if they ever have questions, right?
Sure. I think that's the reason we are here, right? To work for the people of Kansas. So if you guys want to discuss it, a little bit more or go further in the discussion, don't hesitate to reach out to our extension offices. All of our extension agents will be there to help you guys. And I'm here to help you as well. So as much as you guys need, do not hesitate to reach out for us.
Wonderful. Well, I know producers appreciate it just as much as I do, you joining us on the show and offering your insight. So Bruno, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State southeastern area agronomist Bruno Pedreira joining us for a conversation on damaged or dead fescue and some alternatives going into 2023. Before we cut to a short break, K-State Research and Extension is asking for your help. Those of us that work for K-State Research and Extension do our best every day to ensure that you, our stakeholders, are getting the most relevant and timely information possible. That's the job we've been filling for 108 years, ever since K-State Research and Extension was brought into existence. Because of this, we have recently released a public survey asking about the current and potential future needs of those we care about most, Kansans. So if you are a Kansan that is over the age of 18 and has used, currently uses, or hopes to use K-State Research and Extension programming, do us a favor and complete this survey. The results will help our dedicated extension specialists, agents, and researchers provide you with the information and assistance that best meets your needs as a KSRE program user. If you are interested in completing this survey, a link will be posted in the show notes of today's program, which, as always, can be found on agtoday.net. Now we're cutting to a short break, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Guy Allen. He's the senior economist with the International Grains Program. And he's joining us for a discussion on the latest WASDE report for January. And we'll talk through several other reports released this month as well. But Guy, thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here again, Samantha, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. This is our first WASDE report, our first interview, you and I, of the year. So fitting for sure. But Guy, let's go ahead and get into what you thought of the latest WASDE report.
Well, the WASDE report was out last Thursday, and it was fairly friendly from a farmer point of view, particularly for corn. Corn numbers, they basically reduced some of the harvested area for here in the U.S., and so much so that it was outside trade estimates, and that's sort of what lent a bit of support to the markets to start off with when it came out. I thought today, being with the International Grains Program, we'd look primarily at the world numbers.
Let's do that.
Well, starting off with the corn and the coarse grain situation, world coarse grain stocks were down 2 million metric tons to about 322 million metric tons. That came in 11 million tons less than last year. Corn stocks particularly were down 10 million tons less than last year. And most of that loss was in South America, particularly Argentina, where we'd seen some dry weather with not too many other changes in other places. Bit of a surprise, I guess China increased their production by 3.2 million metric tons to 277. Keep in mind, China is the second largest corn producer in the world, right behind the U.S. Between the U.S. and China, that's about two-thirds of total world corn production. Chinese corn imports, which China is sort of a big buyer of ag commodities across the board, and we'll go into that a bit deeper here a bit, remained forecast at 18 million metric tons. That's down from last year's just under 22 million metric tons of total corn imports. And I think there's a bit of foreshadowing there in that drop in Chinese corn imports and imports across all commodities as we sort of see that population start to decline, and we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, Guy, actually. You're saying this is a foreshadowing of some demand destruction, really. That's the theme of this WASDE report, I would say, wouldn't you?
Well, that's sort of been my theme, I think, for a few months now. With the higher price of the commodities, and particularly with the strength that we're seeing in the U.S. dollar, though the U.S. dollar has come off its highs, the index was up to about 114. It's down just above 103. It's still 8% percentage points higher than it was a year ago at this time. And so that's making high-priced commodities for most of these importing countries look very, very expensive. But most of the importing countries, the value of their currencies have been really, really struggling, particularly against the U.S. dollar, as they see sort of high inflation rates and as their currency continues to devalue. And that just continues to concern me going forward. And it's these importing countries where we're starting to see that demand destruction. Going back to China, came out just over the weekend, their census saying that their population has dropped for the first time in 60 years, since 1961. For you young people that can't remember back then, that's when they had the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, and they were actually in the middle of a domestic famine at that time. The UN came in with their population estimates for China of 2022 at 1.412 billion people. That's off by 109, just under 110 million people. That actually makes India the most populous nation in the world now. Last year we had expected that, but probably not till next year, to be honest. So, that's in the wake of declining birth rates. They moved to their one-child policy in 1979, I guess was official, but particularly through the 1970s, they're advocated for smaller families. Since about 2013, they moved from one-child policy to two-child policy, a few years ago to three, and now they're trying to prompt their people to have a higher birth rate, but just not making that happen. And they're suggesting that China actually has one of the oldest average age population in the world, quite a bit older than the U.S. even. And we're going to see a lot of implications, not just for China, but a lot of countries around the world as those changing demographics start to impact the economics and demand for food, demand for energy, availability of labor, and just a whole changing dynamics in the economic situation that the world really hasn't seen before.
Yeah, especially when we think about the change in India being the leading population now compared to China. Those are very different cultures and very different consumption trends, like you mentioned. So yes, we're going to see that play out in imports and exports, right?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And, I think we've sort of seen China's peak imports in the last couple of years. And as we continue to move forward, I just don't know if we're going to see that same volume of trade. And corn and soybeans sort of really highlight that. We might move on to soybeans then, because I've sort of seen similar sort of things. We really see what I'm talking about in China and their soybean imports. China's import forecasts were down another 2 million metric tons to 96 million. That's up a bit from last year at 91.6, but off from 4 years ago when we came in just under that 100 million metric tons. And as that population continues to decline, that demand for food is going to decline as well. That said, we have seen good imports of meal as well as good import of meat and other livestock products into China there as well. So they just don't have the capacity to produce the total food they want. That said, 1.4 billion is still a lot of people. So just looking a bit deeper into soybeans and oil seeds there. Ending stocks for soybeans were increased just under 1 million metric tons. The ending stocks is sort of what we look at to gauge price direction. I think, again, that's reflective of demand destruction. Brazil's crop was raised 1 million metric tons to 153, and they'll commence harvesting of that soon, while Argentina's crop was dropped by 4 million metric tons to about 45.5. That's on the back of dry weather, and Paraguay was left unchanged at 10. But total exporter production was off about 3.2 million metric tons. So that was a bit supportive of the soybean market late last week following that market.
And Brazil, of course, having almost of a record year themselves in terms of production, but also seeing the consequences of that right now in terms of supporting that.
Yeah, look, Brazil continues to have a significant increase in their crop production, both corn and soybeans, in recent years. It'll be interesting to see going forward into the crop they're going to be planting this coming year if they can continue to support that, basically on the price of higher inputs, particularly fertilizer, and the availability of fertilizer as well as a high price. A lot of the Brazilian soils, similar to Western Australia and a lot of the soils in China, they have to have fertilizer every year. And if you don't fertilize them, they just won't produce. It's not like soils in the U.S., Canada, or Argentina that even if you put no fertilizer on it, you throw seed out there, it'll produce something. Mm-hmm. Those soils are a lot more fragile, and just not as productive, and they have to have that fertilizer input. And I think we'll start to see the impacts of that as we go forward.
Absolutely, especially with the crop that they've seen now, the growth and production they've already experienced. They still are lacking in infrastructure to support that, right? So yes. Storage, a concern right now for them. A lot of producers wanting to hold on, and they just can't. Yeah,
storage and that infrastructure is real important. It's something we sort of take for granted here in the U.S. And one of the drivers of that, particularly in Brazil and Argentina, is we're seeing higher inflation rates and higher cost of inputs. Your growers down there will hang on to their commodities, their grain and livestock, as a hedge against inflation. And if I think I'm going to have to buy expensive inputs this coming season, I'll tend to hang on to a lot more of my commodity as a hedge against inflation and that higher cost going forward.
Makes sense for sure in terms of their production, being smart about it, but it's also leading to some disruption in some of the trade trends we normally expect, right?
Well, one of the best examples of that we've seen recently in Argentina with the introduction of the soy dollar and the RG government giving the soybean producers down there a bit of a bonus on their exchange rate. When they did that, it actually prompted a record volume of soybean sales, which encouraged that grain to move to market very, very quickly. And that offset some of the U.S. demand as it shifted back to South America. But to carry that grain forward, you have to have that supply chain, the storage, the handling, the transportation to make that work over time. Okay, we might wrap up talking about wheat production.
Yeah, moving on to wheat.
Look, world wheat production for 2023 came in at 781.3 million metric tons. This was up 0.7 million metric tons, just slightly above December and slightly above the record crop of 2021 at 79.3. That's sort of weighing on the wheat markets. Wheat markets have been pretty unexciting here, moving pretty much sideways on the lower end of the current price range on that. Right now, we're seeing fairly good conditions in the U.S. and Northern Hemisphere. Could always use another drink or two. It's a bit dry still, but we're not using much water when the ground's frozen and the crop's laying there dormant. One thing that has pressured that, two things, predominantly has been the supplies coming out of Russia and the Ukraine. Russia is expecting record of exports of 43 million metric tons. That's in the wake of a 91 million metric ton crop. Also, the Ukraine situation, they've had a pretty reasonable crop, and that's been coming to market in an orderly fashion, which 12 months ago was significantly unexpected with the outbreak of hostilities there. The other thing adding to that is my former place residence in Australia. They've got a third year of record crop down there, going to produce 36.6 million metric tons a week. And I know we talked about the grain quality down there in the wake of a lot of flooding and water. That has come off in a very better than expected quality situation. So with that supply now readily available to the marketplace and in good order, it's weighing on the nearby demand as they move that to market.
Sure, lessen some of the food security concerns globally that I know we were expecting, especially because of wheat, but still some concern there, right?
Yeah, most immediately. Look, world ending stocks are estimated at 268.4 million metric tons. Ending stocks to use is at 34% compared to 33.9%. Still a tightening situation, not quite as tight as corn and soybeans, but we're to the point where people are starting to worry about wheat availability as we continue to tighten that ending stock situation up.
Guy, thank you so much for this comprehensive overview of the latest WASDE report.
You're welcome.
Once again, that was K-State Senior Economist with the International Grains Program, Guy Allen. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. The 2023 K-State Garden Hour, hosted by K-State Research and Extension horticulture staff across the state, kicked off January 4th with Reno County Horticulture Extension Agent Pam Paulsen. As part of her presentation on gardening myths and misconceptions, she emphasized finding reliable information.
For gardeners, you want to look at whether that information is current. When was that information published or revised? And is it something that needs to be current? So something like recommended chemicals or recommended varieties, those change pretty regularly. So you probably don't want something that's 20, 30 years old. But other things like, how to plant a tree. We've learned along the way, so don't go too far back. But, things that are 6, 7, 8 years old are probably still relevant for those kind of things. And then, relevance. So commercial or home gardening. K-State has publications for home tomato gardeners and commercial tomato gardeners. If you've just got a few tomato plants in your backyard, You probably aren't going to follow the same methods that a grower that's got a high tunnel and grows thousands of plants on his acreage. So look at how that information relates to your needs. The other geographic constraints, and that's important with gardening too, in that we all have different climates. So if you're wanting to grow tomatoes here, you're not going to pull publications from Michigan or Vermont to see when your planting dates are, because they have much different climates than we do. You also want to look at the author and their credentials, their qualifications, as well as where that information, the source of that information, was it published in a scientific journal? Is it an extension publication? Or was it a magazine article? And then accuracy. Did they cite any sources or credit whose images they're posting? Is it science-based? Is it well-written? And then purpose. Is it factual and educational? Our extension publications, university publications, are non-biased, where others are entertaining. They can be more opinion than fact or education.
Paulsen also offered tips on ways to search for information online more effectively.
So anytime I'm looking for research-based information, things you want to do are be very specific in your terms. So instead of just looking for good tomatoes to grow, search for blossom end resistant tomatoes. So find those specific problems or for specific information that you're wanting to find, and be very specific in your searches. I will also use what's called the minus operator to narrow the search. So if I'm wanting to look for heirloom tomatoes, but I don't want cherry tomatoes, what I type in is heirloom tomato, and then I put a minus right before that cherry, no space in between. And so it will not return anything that says cherry. Or if I don't want yellow tomatoes and I don't want cherry tomatoes, I'll type in heirloom tomato, minus cherry, minus yellow. If I'm looking for something very specific, I put that whole phrase in quotes. So if I were to type just grape tomato, I will get some information on grape tomatoes, but I might also get information on grapes. I might also get information on just tomatoes. If you put them in the quotes, then that's the only thing it will look for. It has to say grape tomato before it will return that information. And then the other thing I think is important is to search for reliable sources. And so research science-based, it's just habit for me now. I don't even think when I'm doing a search. What I do is I type cite.edu at the end, because .edu will get me university research-based information. And so to do that, I'll type in tomato gardening, type cite:.edu, and that will give me only educational sources, university-based educational resources. If I'm wanting K-State information, I'll type tomato gardening cite:.ksu.edu, and that tells it to just search K-State information. You can rely on university educational information, but there's also, professional societies, professional associations. So like the American Horticultural Society, their website is ahs.org. So if I'm wanting to see what they have on tomato gardening, I type tomato gardening cite:.ahs.org, and that will give me what information the American Horticulture Society has on tomato gardening.
That's Reno County Horticulture Extension Agent Pam Paulsen. To learn more about the K-State Garden Hour, including upcoming webinars, go to hnr.k-state.edu. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.